This video is brought to you by my supporters on Patreon. Hi guys, I'm here with a video showing you how I made my Daisy May cosplay. First off, I just want to mention that I will have an ebook out for this as well if you prefer to see a written step-by-step super in-depth tutorial. That is an option right now. Most likely when this video is released, it will be only available on Patreon for the month of March. However, it will come to my store Envy and Etsy later. Now on to the video. So I took about a day to make this cosplay, which is why this video is titled Cosplay in a Day. And to start off, I cut out the pattern for the kimono type dress. I know that's not the actual garment that she's wearing, however I don't know the name of it, and the pattern that I used as a base was Simplicity's men's and teens kimono pattern. So that's just what I'm going to call it. I only used the top from this pattern and I just altered it to be the length that I needed it to be, and that's pretty much it. I think I also altered the sleeve length a teeny bit. I cut this out on blue broadcloth. I pinned the front and back pieces together with right sides together. For this, like these next few steps, you could really just follow the pattern instructions. It's pretty straightforward. But basically, I just pinned everything together along the sides and the shoulder. And then I pinned the seam for the sleeves shut as well. Then I spent a while sewing all of that down using a straight stitch. Before sewing down the sides, I did pin the sleeves into place only because there was like no real reference as to where you should stop when sewing up the sides. Anyways, usually the shirt will like jolt out a little bit and you can tell where the sleeves are going to like start being attached from, like the starting point or the end point, whichever way you look at it. But on this kind of garment, you can't. So pinning the sleeves in first before sewing up the side helped me like know where I need to stop when sewing the sides closed. And then once the sides were sewn closed, I sewed the sleeve into place. Next, I went along the raw edges at the bottom of the dress and the bottom of both sleeves and folded that over twice so that the fold was folding inward to make a nice, like, clean hem. And pin that all down as you go along. You can also take the chance now to iron that down as well, which will help when sewing. However, I just kind of skip that step because this fabric, if you just press on it a little bit, is pretty good at just like keeping its shape and not really coming too undone. Like it kind of creases really well. So I just waited to iron it until after I sewed it all, but you'll see that later. After that is all pinned, go ahead and sew it down. Then I cut out the fabric that I used for the apron, which is a lighter blue broadcloth, and to figure out the apron size, it's basically just a really long rectangle. I measured out the length that I wanted it to be and how wide I wanted it to be, traced that using a roller onto the fabric, and cut it out, giving a little bit extra around all the edges for some seam allowance. Or hem allowance? I also cut out what will be the bias tape for the dress using the pattern piece from the pattern and just altering it slightly to fit the length of the dress. I took the rectangle cut of fabric from my apron, double folded over all of the edges to create a nice clean hem, and pinned that into place. I switched back over to the bias tape and sewed the two halves of the bias tape that I had cut out earlier together, so now that they are one long strip of fabric. Then I double folded over both of the longest edges of this bias tape and pinned that down, and then ironed it. And I ironed it because this needed to be folded in half again, like entirely, and having these raw edges already tucked in and folded down and pressed into place is going to make that next step so much easier. Fold the entire strip of fabric in half, pin and iron that down, and you have a giant strip of bias tape. Now I jump back over to the apron and sew down that hem that we had pinned down earlier, and just sew that into place. I also pinned the bias tape along the front of the dress, like all the way around both sides and the back of the neck, basically the only raw edge remaining on the dress, and then sewed that into place. However, I didn't get video footage of that because I'm pretty sure my camera was dead at that point. But I did get video footage of this. This is after the bias tape has been sewed into place. There's a little bit excess fabric left on both ends. I trimmed that, tucked in a little bit, so make sure you don't trim it all the way to like the height of the dress. You want to have a teensy bit, like 1/4 of an inch left over, so that you could tuck that in, and then I iron that down just to make the sewing in the next step easier. So basically you're going to iron that down and then you're going to sew it down so that that has a nice finished hem. To make the belt for my Daisy May cosplay, I cut 4 long strips of fabric. I only had to cut 4 because the cut of fabric that I had was not long enough to cut only 2 strips of fabric. Basically, you want to do however many strips you need to do to get it to fit all the way around your waist. And I doubled that because I'm going to piece together or place together 2 slabs of the belt, so it's going to be like a double layered belt, as you see me doing here. Before I did this though, I did sew 2 halves together, so now I have 2 long strips of fabric rather than the 4 separate strips of fabric. So I sewed 2 halves together and then 2 halves together again to get 2 strips of fabric. Hopefully this is all making sense. Anyways, once that was done, I placed right sides together, although this is broadcloth and it doesn't really matter. But anyways, I placed the 2 right sides together and then sewed down both of the longest edges, the top and the bottom ones, to basically make a tube. Once that is sewn together, you want to pull the belt right side out so that the seams are on the inside. You can press that down with an iron to make sure everything's nice and flat, or you can do that after this step, which is tucking in the edges of the belt and sewing that down with a top stitch. Now I moved over to finishing up the apron, and to finish it up I needed to add the little hashtag symbols that are all over her apron, and to do that I created a stencil in paper, added a little bit of painter's tape to the back to help everything lie flat and be as like pressed down to the fabric as possible to keep any paint from getting under this stencil. I used fabric paint to paint in the stencil and a paintbrush. You can also use a sponge. Something you should be aware of, I guess, is when placing down the paint, you want to dab the paintbrush rather than paint it on like you normally would, like just streaking it on. That will help prevent any paint from getting under the stencil. As you're dabbing it on, you also want to press down the edges of the stencil or paper just to make sure everything's staying nice and flat, and there's very little opportunity for the paint to get again under the stencil to keep your lines nice and clean. I do a couple layers of this and then I remove the stencil and continue to layer on the paint, filling in any gaps, cleaning up any lines until the hashtag symbol is fully opaque. And I do this multiple times for each hashtag that needs to be on her apron. I used 4mm EVA foam to make the ears. I drew up a quick pattern, traced that onto the foam, and then cut it out. I wanted the back side of the ears to have a beveled edge, so I took some scissors and then cut away at the foam around the edges at an angle before using my Dremel to sand and smooth that all down. I primed those pieces with a few layers of wood glue and then began painting. I used an airbrush to paint these ears, however you could totally use just acrylic paint and a paintbrush or spray paint. And the color that I used for the ears was like a orangish tannish color, trying to best match the ears color that Daisy May actually has, but also not going too orange so that it matches a little bit better with my hair, although it's definitely not going to be exact. I just was kind of picking a balance in between. I add a yellow color to the center of the inside of the ears next, and then top it all off with a clear coat of matte spray paint. I take a couple hair clips and use some hot glue to attach them to the bottom of the ears, and that is how I attach the ears to my head. Lastly, I worked on the bandana. To make the bandana, I took a large cut of white broadcloth and folded it in half to get a triangle shape. Then I cut that out, making sure I had 2 layers of this because I wanted it to be double layered, similar to how we did the belt. Place the 2 pieces right side together and sew all around the edges, leaving a small opening on one of the edges so that you can then turn it inside out so that all of the seams are in the inside. I should also note there will be no footage of me making the turnip hat in this video because I messed up the first time I did it and I didn't really like how it turned out, so I had to entirely redo it a different day, so I'm just making that one separate video. It's going to be a second video. However, if you don't mess up like me, this cosplay should still be able to be done in a day, or close to it at the very least. Once the bandana is turned right side out, go ahead and iron that flat, and then you can add a top stitch all along the sides if you like. This will also make the little hole that we left open, that will make that be closed up as well. And that finishes it up for this video. That is how I made my Daisy May cosplay. Once again, I will have an entirely different video on the turnip and turnip hat. However, this cosplay should really only take about a day, but again, that also depends on how fast as a person you work and exactly how many hours in a day you have. This literally took me a whole day, a full, not 24 hours, but pretty close to that. So it's still technically a cosplay in a day though. Anyways, yeah, that's it. And again, I will also have an ebook out on how I made this cosplay with step-by-step photos and instructions, and I feel like it might explain it a little bit better than I do now because I think I can write better than I can speak, because oh boy do I mess up a lot when I'm talking. If that's something you're interested in though, it will be available on Patreon this month and in my store Envy and Etsy soon after that, so keep an eye out for that. If you want to see photos of this finished cosplay, that will be on my Instagram and website and yada yada. All those links are down in the description below. Anyways, that's it. Stick around for future videos, guys. Thanks for watching. Have a lovely day, and bye!